Sometimes the phone call that changes your life comes exactly 2 seconds before you give up. Claire Bennett didn't recognize the number lighting up her cracked iPhone screen that rainy Thursday night. She almost ignored it. In fact, she nearly let it ring until voicemail while her hands stayed buried in warm chocolate chip cookie dough inside the tiny apartment kitchen she'd been working in for the last 14 hours straight. The sink was overflowing with mixing bowls. Flour dust covered the counter like fresh snow. A cheap box fan rattled in the corner because the oven had turned the apartment into a furnace. And standing beside the refrigerator in pink socks and oversized pajamas, Claire's 8-year-old daughter Sophie rubbed her sleepy eyes and whispered, "Mom, are you coming to bed soon?" Claire looked exhausted. The kind of exhausted that doesn't disappear with sleep. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair tied back in a rushed messy bun. Fingers red from washing trays all day. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. 11:42 p.m. Another batch still needed to cool before packaging. Another dozen orders still needed labels. Another morning, she'd have to wake up before sunrise to deliver cookies across 3 different neighborhoods using a 15-year-old Honda that shook every time it hit 40 miles per hour. Then the phone rang again. Unknown number. Claire sighed and pressed the answer button with her wrist because both hands were covered in dough. "Hello," she said quietly. There was a pause. Then a calm, professional voice answered. "Hi. Is this Claire Bennett, owner of Sweet Haven Cookies?" Claire froze. Sophie looked up immediately because she could tell something felt different. Claire swallowed hard. "Yes, this is Claire." The voice continued. "My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I'm calling from Walmart's Regional Product Development Division." For a second, Claire honestly thought someone was playing a joke on her. Walmart? The Walmart? Her heart started pounding so loudly she could barely hear the rest of the sentence. She leaned against the kitchen counter to steady herself. 2 years earlier, she had stood in a grocery store staring at her debit card with exactly $11.43 left in her bank account. $11. That was all she had to her name after rent, after utilities, after daycare bills she could barely afford. She still remembered the embarrassment of calculating ingredient prices on her phone while other shoppers pushed carts around her. Butter or vanilla extract, flour or brown sugar. She couldn't afford everything. At the time, nobody believed homemade cookies could become a real business. Not her former co-workers. Not her landlord. Not even her own sister. Just find another office job, they told her. People don't build companies from apartment kitchens. But now, standing barefoot on a stained linoleum floor while rain tapped against the apartment windows, Claire heard the Walmart representative say something she never imagined possible. "We've been following your product online for months." Claire slowly looked at Sophie, whose tiny face was filled with confusion and curiosity. And in that moment, with melted chocolate on her sleeves and unpaid bills sitting unopened on the counter beside her, Claire realized her entire life was about to change. 2 years earlier, Claire Bennett sat alone in the parking lot of a discount grocery store staring at the total on her phone banking app for nearly 5 full minutes because she hoped somehow the number would change. $11.43. That was everything she had left until the end of the month. Outside her windshield, shopping carts rattled through puddles while cold November rain streaked down the glass. Sophie was asleep in the back seat under a faded yellow blanket from kindergarten, hugging a stuffed rabbit with one missing eye. Claire looked at her daughter through the rearview mirror and felt the kind of fear that settled deep in the chest and stayed there. 3 weeks earlier, the insurance company where she worked had downsized unexpectedly. Claire had packed her desk into a cardboard box while pretending not to cry in front of coworkers who avoided eye contact because they were afraid they might be next. At first, she believed she would find another office job quickly. She had experience. She worked hard. She always showed up on time. But every interview ended the same way. "We decided to move forward with another candidate." One manager told her directly that hiring a single mother could create scheduling complications. Claire smiled politely during the interview and cried in her car afterward. Now bills covered the tiny kitchen table inside her apartment. Rent notice, electric bill, credit card minimums, a daycare reminder printed on bright orange paper. She had already canceled streaming services, stopped buying coffee, and started skipping meals whenever Sophie wanted seconds at dinner. Some nights they ate scrambled eggs because eggs were cheap and filling. Other nights, Claire told Sophie they were having breakfast night just to make it sound fun. Inside the grocery store, Claire walked slowly through the baking aisle carrying a calculator on her phone. Flour, brown sugar, butter, chocolate chips, vanilla extract. Every item mattered. She picked up one brand, checked the price, then traded it for a cheaper version. By the time she reached the register, her hands were trembling. The cashier scanned everything while Claire silently added numbers in her head. When the total appeared, she held her breath. $11.17. Claire almost laughed from relief. She still had 26 cents left. Back at the apartment, Sophie sat on the counter swinging her legs while Claire unpacked groceries into cabinets that looked nearly empty. "Are you making cookies?" Sophie asked with sudden excitement. Claire forced a smile. The best cookies in town. The truth was, Claire had not planned some big business. She was just desperate to find one thing she could still control. Her mother used to bake cookies every Sunday before she passed away, and Claire still remembered the smell filling their house when life felt safe and simple. She found the old handwritten recipe card tucked inside a cookbook stained with butter marks and faded ink. That night, after Sophie fell asleep on the couch beside cartoons playing softly on television, Claire stood alone in the kitchen mixing dough by hand because her electric mixer had broken months earlier. The apartment was silent except for the ticking oven and the sound of rain outside. She did not know if anyone would buy homemade cookies from a tired woman with overdue bills and no business experience. But somewhere between the first tray and the second, Claire made herself one quiet promise. If this failed, at least she would know she tried everything. The next morning, Claire woke up before sunrise to the sound of her smoke detector chirping because the battery was dying again. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality returned all at once. Unpaid bills on the counter. Job applications with no responses. 26 cents left in her checking account. And cooling on wire racks across the kitchen sat 3 dozen homemade cookies she had spent half the night baking. The apartment smelled like butter, vanilla, and melted chocolate. Sophie wandered into the kitchen rubbing her eyes and immediately smiled. "They smell like Grandma's house," she said softly. Claire felt something tighten in her chest because nobody had mentioned her mother in months. She handed Sophie one warm cookie wrapped in a napkin. "Taste test," Claire whispered. Sophie took one bite and her eyes widened. "Mom, these are really good." Claire laughed quietly for the first time in days. But tasting good and making money were two different things. Around 8 o'clock that morning, Claire grabbed her phone and stared at it nervously. She had never sold anything online before. She barely understood social media beyond posting birthday pictures and school events. Still, she opened the local community Facebook group for their town and uploaded a quick photo of the cookies stacked on a plate near the apartment window where sunlight hit them perfectly. The picture was not professional. The plate had tiny scratches. The lighting was uneven, and part of Sophie's coloring book was visible in the background. Claire typed and deleted the caption 6 different times before finally posting. "Fresh homemade chocolate chip cookies available today. Baked from scratch. Porch pickup only." Then she threw her phone onto the couch like it might explode. For the next hour, nothing happened. No likes, no comments, no messages. Claire cleaned the kitchen in silence while trying not to feel embarrassed for even trying. Maybe everyone else had been right. Maybe homemade cookies from a small apartment kitchen sounded ridiculous. Then suddenly her phone buzzed. One message. A woman named Karen asked if she could buy 1 dozen for her office. Claire stared at the screen so long Karen sent a second message asking if the cookies were still available. "Yes," Claire typed back immediately, her fingers shaking. "Absolutely." 30 minutes later, another order appeared. Then another. By noon, she had sold all 3 dozen cookies. Claire could barely believe it. She borrowed empty bakery boxes from a neighbor downstairs who worked at a cafe and tied them with leftover ribbon Sophie found in an old craft drawer. That afternoon, Claire loaded the boxes carefully into her Honda, while Sophie sat in the passenger seat cheering every time her mother checked another address off the list. One customer handed Claire a $20 bill and told her, "These taste like childhood." Another woman asked if she catered birthday parties. Claire drove home that evening feeling something unfamiliar. Hope. Real hope. After gas money and ingredient costs, she made $47 profit. $47 was not life-changing. It would not erase the overdue notices stacked on her counter. But for the first time since losing her job, Claire earned money with her own hands doing something nobody forced her to do. That night, after Sophie fell asleep beside her on the couch, Claire opened her phone again and noticed 3 new messages waiting in her inbox. One customer wanted 2 dozen for the weekend. Another asked if she made oatmeal raisin. And the third message simply said, "Whoever taught you this recipe knew exactly what they were doing." Claire looked at the kitchen, still warm from baking, and quietly whispered to herself, "Maybe this can become something bigger." But she had no idea how difficult the next few months were about to become. For the next few weeks, Claire barely slept. Every morning started before 6 o'clock with grocery runs, school drop-offs, baking trays, sliding into the oven, and handwritten order lists taped to the refrigerator door. The tiny apartment kitchen slowly transformed into a crowded workspace filled with cooling racks, flour bags, and stacks of borrowed bakery boxes. Some nights, Sophie colored quietly at the kitchen table while Claire measured ingredients beside her. Other nights, the little girl fell asleep under a blanket on the couch, while timers beeped in the background and warm cookie trays covered every inch of counter space. Claire was exhausted, but the orders kept increasing. Customers started recommending her cookies to friends. Teachers ordered them for staff meetings. Nurses bought them for hospital break rooms. A local realtor even requested 4 dozen for an open house event. Every time her phone buzzed with another order, Claire felt equal parts grateful and terrified because she still had no idea if this small success would last another week. Then one Saturday morning, Claire decided to take a bigger risk. The town hosted a monthly outdoor market downtown where local businesses sold handmade products, baked goods, and crafts. Claire had seen pictures online for years, but never imagined herself participating. Still, Sophie convinced her. "You should go, Mom. Everybody likes your cookies." Claire spent 2 full days preparing. She baked more than 200 cookies in 6 different flavors: chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, peanut butter, double chocolate, snickerdoodle, sea salt caramel. She borrowed folding tables from a neighbor and printed a homemade sign at the public library because she could not afford professional banners. Early Saturday morning, Claire loaded everything carefully into the Honda while cold winds swept through the parking lot. Sophie wore a pink knit hat and carried napkins like they were treasure. At first, Claire felt hopeful. The market was crowded with people carrying coffee cups and shopping bags while live acoustic music played near the fountain downtown. But the feeling disappeared almost immediately after check-in. Several established vendors glanced at her tiny setup and exchanged polite smiles that felt more judgmental than friendly. One woman selling artisan pastries looked at Claire's homemade sign and asked, "So this is your first real event?" Claire nodded nervously. The woman gave a small laugh. "Well, good luck. Baking businesses usually do not survive long around here." Another vendor nearby added, "People buy homemade stuff online for a while because they feel bad. It fades fast." Claire pretended not to hear them, but the words stayed in her head all morning. Business started slowly. Customers walked past her table without stopping. Some glanced at the cookies, but moved toward larger booths with polished branding and expensive displays. By noon, Claire had sold less than $20 worth of cookies. Her confidence started collapsing. She watched other vendors laugh comfortably with long lines forming in front of their booths while her own table stayed mostly empty. At one point, she quietly stepped behind her stand and checked her bank account again. After paying the market registration fee and buying extra ingredients, she had almost nothing left. Sophie noticed her expression immediately. "Mom, maybe people are just still walking around," she said softly, trying to help. Claire forced a smile, but inside she felt foolish for believing she belonged there at all. Then, just as she started wondering if she should pack everything early and go home, a woman wearing hospital scrubs stopped directly in front of the table, picked up a chocolate chip cookie sample, and took a bite. A few seconds later, her eyes widened. The woman in hospital scrubs closed her eyes for a second after taking the first bite, like she was trying to remember something. Then she looked at Claire and said, "Oh my goodness. These taste exactly like the cookies my grandmother used to make." Claire blinked in surprise because nobody at the market had stopped long enough to say anything kind all morning. The woman smiled warmly and introduced herself as Melissa. She explained that she had just finished a 12-hour overnight shift at the emergency room and came to the market hoping to find coffee before heading home. Instead, she found Claire's cookie stand. "How much for a dozen?" she asked immediately. Claire tried not to sound too excited when she answered, $12. Melissa bought 2 boxes without hesitation. Then before walking away, she pulled out her phone and asked, "Do you mind if I post these online?" Claire laughed nervously. "Sure, I guess." She did not think much about it afterward. The market continued slowly for another hour, but something strange started happening around lunchtime. More people began stopping at her table. A young couple asked if she was the cookie lady from TikTok. Claire looked confused because she had never even made a TikTok video herself. Then another customer arrived saying they drove 20 minutes because someone online said these were the best homemade cookies in town. Claire stared at Sophie in disbelief while the little girl grinned proudly beside the table. During a short break, Claire finally checked her phone and nearly dropped it. Melissa had posted a simple video from her car while eating one of the cookies after her shift. In the video, she looked exhausted, still wearing hospital scrubs, speaking honestly into the camera. "I have worked 13 hours today, and this is the first thing that made me smile all morning," she said before taking another bite. "Whoever made these cookies deserves a bakery." The video already had thousands of views. Comments flooded underneath asking where people could buy them. Claire refreshed the screen over and over because the numbers kept climbing every few seconds. By late afternoon, a line had formed in front of her small folding table. People bought cookies faster than Claire could package them. Some customers ordered extras to freeze at home. Others asked if she shipped nationwide. Sophie started helping organize cash while proudly telling everyone, "My mom makes all of these herself." For the first time all day, Claire forgot about the vendors who mocked her that morning. She forgot about overdue bills and rejection emails and sleepless nights. She was too busy trying to keep up with strangers thanking her for cookies she almost never made in the first place. One older man even told her, "These remind people of comfort. You cannot teach that." By sunset, Claire had completely sold out. Empty trays covered the table where stacks of cookies had been only hours earlier. As vendors around her packed expensive displays into trailers and vans, Claire stood beside her nearly empty folding table in total disbelief. Her phone would not stop buzzing with notifications, comments, and new messages asking for orders. Sophie hugged her tightly and whispered, "I told you people would love them." Claire smiled, but deep down she also felt something else. Fear. Because overnight, what started as a desperate attempt to survive suddenly became something much bigger, and she had absolutely no idea how she was going to handle it. By the following Monday morning, Claire's phone looked completely different from the quiet little inbox she used to check only for job rejection emails and school reminders. Hundreds of notifications covered the screen. New followers, local interview requests, catering inquiries, messages from strangers asking if she delivered outside the city. The video Melissa posted had spread far beyond their town over the weekend, and now people who had never met Claire Bennett suddenly wanted her cookies. At first, it felt unreal. Claire sat at her kitchen table in sweatpants at 6 o'clock in the morning staring at the numbers while Sophie ate cereal beside her before school. "Mom," Sophie whispered carefully, "I think you are famous." Claire laughed nervously. Absolutely not. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. Orders exploded so quickly that Claire stopped counting individual dozens and started writing totals on sticky notes taped across the cabinets. 40 boxes for a church fundraiser, 60 for a real estate company, 35 for a dentist office holiday event. One customer from another state even offered to pay overnight shipping just to try them. Claire worked constantly. She baked before sunrise, after school drop-offs, late into the night, and sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. The apartment became unbearably hot from the oven running almost non-stop. Cooling racks covered the couch. Bags of flour lined the hallway. Chocolate chips filled kitchen drawers meant for silverware. Sophie started helping after homework by folding boxes and placing thank you stickers on packaging while listening to music quietly from an old tablet. Some nights Claire looked at her daughter sitting there carefully organizing ribbon and felt guilty that childhood for Sophie suddenly revolved around cookie orders and delivery schedules. But Sophie never complained. In fact, she looked proud every time another order notification appeared. Still, success came with a cost Claire never expected. Her back constantly hurt from standing for 16 hours a day. Tiny burns covered her fingers from grabbing hot trays too quickly. She forgot meals, forgot sleep, forgot what weekends even felt like. One night, she accidentally fell asleep sitting upright at the kitchen table while waiting for cookies to cool and woke up 40 minutes later with frosting smeared across her sleeve and a dozen unanswered messages blinking on her phone. Then came the mistakes. One customer received the wrong flavor assortment. Another order arrived late because Claire's old Honda would not start in freezing weather. Someone online complained that cookies sold out too quickly. Every small problem suddenly felt enormous because now hundreds of people were watching. Claire started panicking every time her phone buzzed. She worried constantly about disappointing people, about failing publicly after finally finding something that worked. Then, during the busiest week she had ever experienced, disaster hit. Claire had just pulled a fresh tray from the oven when the kitchen lights flickered suddenly. A loud pop echoed behind the stove. The oven shut off completely. Claire froze. She pressed buttons repeatedly. Nothing happened. The apartment became strangely quiet without the hum of heat and fans. "Mom?" Sophie asked softly from the table. Claire opened the oven door desperately, hoping somehow it would restart. Half-baked cookies sat ruined inside. She grabbed her phone and searched repair costs while her stomach dropped lower with every estimate she read. The cheapest emergency repair appointment was more money than she currently had available. Orders for the weekend were stacked across the counter waiting to be finished, and without the oven, everything stopped instantly. Claire slowly sat down on the kitchen floor surrounded by cooling racks and unfinished dough, while tears filled her eyes for the first time in months. Because after fighting so hard to build this business from almost nothing, she suddenly realized one broken appliance might destroy everything. Claire sat on the kitchen floor long after the oven went silent, staring at the dark control panel like she could somehow force it back to life if she waited long enough. The apartment smelled like half-baked dough and burnt sugar, but for the first time in months, there was no warmth coming from the kitchen. No timers ringing. No trays cooling. Just silence. Sophie slowly walked over and sat beside her mother without saying anything. Claire wiped her face quickly because she did not want her daughter seeing her cry again. "It is okay," she whispered, even though she did not believe it herself. But the numbers in her head would not stop spinning. Repair costs, ingredient invoices, refund requests, delivery deadlines. She already had over 200 dozen cookies ordered for the weekend, and every hour without the oven pushed her further behind. That night, Claire sent apology messages to customers one by one while sitting under the weak yellow light above the stove. Some people were understanding. Others were not. One customer demanded an immediate refund and posted online complaining that small businesses were unreliable. Another canceled a corporate order worth almost $400. Every notification felt like another crack spreading through something Claire had worked so hard to build. Around midnight, Sophie fell asleep on the couch waiting for her mother to finish answering messages. Claire covered her gently with a blanket before returning to the kitchen table where unpaid bills sat beside order receipts and flour-covered notebooks filled with recipes. She looked completely drained. 2 years of sacrifice suddenly felt fragile. One broken oven. That was all it took. The next morning, Claire called every appliance repair company in town searching for a cheaper option, but the answers stayed the same. Parts needed. Replacing. Emergency labor costs extra. Earliest repair appointments were still days away. Claire finally opened her banking app and felt sick. After refunding canceled orders and paying recent supply expenses, she barely had enough left to cover rent. For the first time since starting the business, she quietly considered stopping altogether. Maybe everyone who doubted her had been right from the beginning. Maybe this was never sustainable. Maybe a woman baking cookies in a tiny apartment kitchen was never supposed to grow beyond local weekend orders. That afternoon, Claire sat inside the pantry beside stacks of unopened flour bags because it was the only quiet place in the apartment where Sophie could not hear her crying. She buried her face in her hands and let herself break down completely. Not because she was lazy, not because she wanted pity, but because she was tired. Tired of carrying every responsibility alone. Tired of pretending she was not terrified all the time. Tired of fighting so hard just to stay one step ahead of failure. Then her phone buzzed again. Claire almost ignored it. She assumed it was another complaint or cancellation. But when she looked down, she noticed the subject line was different. Retail Partnership Inquiry. Claire frowned in confusion. The sender address looked official, but she immediately assumed it was spam. She received strange marketing emails all the time now that her business pages had gained attention online. Without even opening the message fully, she nearly deleted it. But something stopped her. Maybe curiosity. Maybe desperation. Slowly, Claire clicked the email open while sitting on the pantry floor surrounded by flour bags and cardboard boxes. Her eyes moved across the screen once. Then again more carefully. The message explained that someone from a regional retail development team had discovered Sweet Haven cookies through social media engagement and customer demand trends. They wanted to schedule a phone conversation about possible expansion opportunities. Claire's heart started beating faster. At the bottom of the email was a company signature she recognized instantly. Walmart. Claire reread the email at least 10 times because her brain refused to process what she was seeing. Sitting on the pantry floor in sweatpants covered with flour stains, she stared at the Walmart signature like it belonged to someone else's life. The message was professional, simple, and surprisingly direct. They had been monitoring online engagement around Sweet Haven cookies for months. Customer demand data showed unusually strong local response. They wanted to discuss whether Claire had interest in scaling production regionally. Claire laughed once out of pure disbelief. Scale production? She did not even have a working oven. For a full minute, she honestly wondered if the email was fake. She checked the sender address again. Then again. Everything looked legitimate. Her hand started shaking so badly, she accidentally dropped the phone against a stack of flour bags. Sophie walked into the pantry a second later, holding a coloring book. "Mom?" she asked carefully. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" Claire looked at her daughter with tears still in her eyes and whispered, "I think Walmart just emailed us." Sophie blinked. "Like the Walmart?" Claire nodded slowly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Sophie smiled so wide it nearly broke Claire's heart. "I told you your cookies were special." The next morning, Claire borrowed a neighbor's oven so she could finish at least part of the weekend orders while waiting for repairs. She worked nonstop, but now everything felt different. Somewhere in the back of her mind, that email kept replaying over and over. Around noon, her phone rang from an unfamiliar Arkansas number. Claire almost ignored it because she was carrying hot trays across the kitchen. But something told her to answer. "Hello," she said breathlessly. "Hi, is this Claire Bennett?" The voice asked politely. "Yes. This is Ryan Mitchell from Walmart's Regional Product Development Division. I sent you an email yesterday regarding Sweet Haven cookies." Claire stopped moving completely. Around her, timers beeped and mixers hummed from the borrowed kitchen setup. But suddenly, all she could hear was the voice on the phone. Ryan sounded calm and professional, but not cold. He explained that Walmart's team had noticed unusual online traction connected to Claire's products after multiple social media videos gained attention. But according to him, what impressed them most was not just viral popularity. It was customer behavior. People kept returning. Engagement stayed consistent. Local demand kept increasing instead of fading away after the initial trend. "That usually tells us something important," Ryan explained. Claire leaned against the counter because her knees suddenly felt weak. 2 years earlier, she had counted coins inside a grocery store, trying to afford butter and flour. Now someone from one of the largest retailers in America was explaining customer analytics connected to her cookies. It felt impossible. Ryan asked questions about production capacity, packaging, ingredients, shelf life, and long-term goals. Claire answered honestly. She admitted she was still baking from a tiny apartment kitchen. She admitted her oven had literally broken the day before. For a second, she worried the conversation would end right there. Instead, Ryan laughed softly and said something Claire never forgot. Most big brands do not start in giant factories. They start with one person making something people genuinely love. Claire covered her mouth with her hand because tears instantly filled her eyes again. Not tears of fear this time. Relief. Validation. Exhaustion finally colliding with hope. Before ending the call, Ryan told her the company wanted to continue discussions about possible regional placement opportunities if she could eventually scale operations safely. Claire thanked him at least 5 different times before hanging up. Then she stood completely still in the kitchen while her heart pounded harder than it ever had before. Because for the first time since losing her office job, Claire Bennett realized she was no longer just trying to survive. The months that followed changed every part of Claire Bennett's life, but not all at once like people imagined when they heard the story later. There was no magical overnight transformation, no limousine waiting outside her apartment, no instant millionaire moment. The reality was slower, messier, and far more emotional than that. After the first conversations with Walmart, Claire spent weeks learning things she had never even considered before. Packaging regulations, commercial kitchen requirements, ingredient sourcing, production safety inspections, shelf stability testing. There were conference calls during Sophie's school hours and paperwork spread across the kitchen table late at night after baking orders were finished. Some days Claire still felt like the same terrified woman who once stood in a grocery aisle calculating whether she could afford butter. The difference now was that people finally believed in her too. A local bakery owner offered temporary kitchen space after hearing her story online. A small business mentor volunteered to help her understand contracts and scaling production. Customers continued supporting Sweet Haven cookies everywhere she went. The same town that once overlooked her folding table at the outdoor market now proudly shared her story across social media. Slowly, impossible things started becoming real. New packaging arrived with the Sweet Haven logo professionally printed across soft cream-colored boxes. Claire hired 2 part-time assistants from the community to help with baking and deliveries. Sophie still insisted on placing thank you cards into certain orders herself because she said customers deserved something happy inside the box. And through every exhausting step, Claire never forgot the apartment kitchen where all of it began. Nearly 2 years after that first $11 grocery trip, Walmart finalized a regional test placement for Sweet Haven cookies in select stores across the state. Claire barely slept the night before launch day. Around 5 in the morning, she sat quietly at the kitchen table holding a coffee mug with both hands while Sophie bounced excitedly beside the door waiting to leave. "Come on, Mom," Sophie kept saying. "We have to go see them." Outside, the air felt cold and sharp as the sun slowly rose over empty parking lots and quiet streets. Claire drove the same old Honda that had delivered her first cookie orders years earlier. The engine still rattled at stoplights. The passenger door still squeaked when opened. Some things never changed. When they finally walked into Walmart together, Claire suddenly felt nervous in a way she could not explain. Families pushed shopping carts through bright aisles while employees stocked shelves like any normal morning. Nobody around them understood how much this moment meant. Claire and Sophie reached the bakery section slowly. Then Sophie stopped walking. "Mom," she whispered. Claire looked up. There they were. Stacked neatly beneath bright store lights sat rows of Sweet Haven cookies in professional packaging with Claire's name printed clearly on every box. For a second, she could not move. 2 years earlier, she had cried in a parking lot over $11.43. Now complete strangers were picking up her cookies from shelves inside one of the largest retail stores in America. Sophie grabbed her hand tightly and smiled up at her mother with tears already forming in her eyes. "That is your name," she whispered proudly. Claire covered her mouth as emotion hit all at once. The sleepless nights, the rejection emails, the broken oven, the fear, the doubt. Every painful step somehow led to this exact moment. And standing there beside her daughter under bright fluorescent lights in the middle of an ordinary Walmart aisle, Claire Bennett realized success did not arrive because life suddenly became easy. It arrived because she refused to quit on the hardest day of her life.